The courtroom smelled like floor polish and recycled air. I sat at the defense table with my attorney, Jennifer Coe, watching the rain streak down the tall windows behind the judge's bench. It was a Thursday morning in late October, and the gallery was mostly empty except for Claire's mother in the second row and a court reporter whose fingers moved across the keys like she'd stopped listening to the words years ago. Claire sat 15 feet away at the plaintiff's table, her blonde hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger, more vulnerable. Intentional. She wore a gray cardigan I'd bought her 2 Christmases ago, which felt like a small cruelty I wasn't sure she'd planned or if I was just reading too much into fabric. Her attorney, Richard Voss, sat beside her in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He had the kind of confidence that comes from winning often, the kind that makes you lean back in your chair and whisper to your client like the outcome is already decided. Judge Brennan reviewed the motion summaries with reading glasses perched on her nose, occasionally making notes. She was in her early 60s, known for being thorough and unsentimental. I'd been told that was good for me. I wasn't sure I believed it yet. Voss had spent the last 2 hearings painting me as controlling, emotionally volatile, possibly unfaithful. He'd submitted text messages where I'd asked Claire where she was, presented as evidence of obsessive monitoring. He'd brought her friend Danielle, who testified I'd once raised my voice during an argument about grocery bills, which became a pattern of intimidation. He'd shown the court photo of a woman I'd had coffee with, a colleague from the teachers' union, and suggested it was evidence of an affair that justified Claire's need to protect herself and their daughter. It was a masterclass in narrative construction, and for weeks it had been working. Jennifer sat beside me now, unnervingly calm. In front of her was a slim leather folder and a small USB drive labeled Exhibit E in her precise handwriting. She'd told me 3 days ago, in her small office that smelled like jasmine tea, they'd been very thorough. But thorough people sometimes forget what they've left behind. I didn't ask what she meant. I'd learned to trust her the way you trust a surgeon. You don't need to understand procedure, just the competence. Judge Brennan looked up. Mr. Voss, I've reviewed your supplemental brief. Do you have anything further before we move to closing arguments? Voss stood smoothly. No, Your Honor. I believe the record speaks clearly to Mrs. Harmon's need for primary custody and the asset division as proposed. He sat down. Claire's hand rested on the table, pale and still. She hadn't looked at me once today. Ms. Coe, the judge asked. Jennifer rose, and the room felt different somehow, tighter, like the air pressure had changed. Your Honor, the defense would like to submit one final piece of evidence for the court's consideration. Voss frowned slightly. Claire's shoulders stiffened. Jennifer handed the USB drive to clerk, who walked it to the judge's bench. This is a compilation of communications recovered from a shared cloud storage account. We believe it provides necessary context to the claims made against Mr. Harmon. The clerk plugged it into the courtroom's display system. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life. That was the moment everything they'd built against me began to crumble. But it hadn't started here. It started months before with one unanswered call. It started in March, on a Tuesday that felt like every other Tuesday. I came home from parent-teacher conferences around 8:30, later than usual because Mrs. Chun had wanted to discuss her son's history grade for 20 minutes. The house was dark except for the glow from the living room. Vanessa on the couch with her laptop, a glass of wine half empty on the side table. "Hey," I said, dropping my bag by the door. She closed the laptop quickly, not slammed, just decisive. "Hey, how were conferences?" "Long, tiring." I moved toward the kitchen. "You eat yet?" I grabbed something earlier. Her voice had that pleasant, distant quality I'd started noticing over the past few weeks, like talking to someone through glass. I heated up leftover pasta and ate standing at the counter, listening to her type in the other room. Short bursts. Stop. Type again. The rhythm of conversation, not work. When I walked back through, her phone was face down on the couch cushion beside her. I'd never paid attention to how she positioned her phone before, but once you notice a pattern, you can't stop seeing it. Face down at dinner, face down on the nightstand, face down everywhere, like the screen itself was a confession. I didn't say anything. I went upstairs, showered, and lay in bed reading about the Treaty of Versailles until she came up an hour later. She kissed my forehead the way you kiss someone you're fond of but not connected to, and turned off her light. The next week, she started working late. Tuesday, then Thursday, then Tuesday and Thursday became a pattern. Big project, she said. End of quarter reports. Vanessa worked in commercial real estate management. Something about lease audits and property assessments that I'd never fully understood but had always trusted. Trust was what we'd built everything on, or what I thought we'd built everything on. One night in early April, I woke up at 2 a.m. and she wasn't in bed. I found her in the bathroom with the door closed, whispering into her phone. I stood in the hallway in my boxers and t-shirt, not eavesdropping exactly, just present. I heard fragments. A man's name I didn't recognize, Troy. A soft laugh that didn't sound like the laugh she used with me. Then, I know, soon. When she opened the door, I was back in bed, eyes closed, heart hammering. The real discovery came 3 weeks later. She'd left her purse on the kitchen counter when she went out for a run, unusual, because she always took it with her, kept her phone in the side pocket for music. But this time, rush maybe, she'd forgotten. I didn't plan to look. I was clearing breakfast dishes and the purse tipped over, spilling a lipstick, her wallet, and a folded piece of paper onto the tile. I picked up the paper because it was there, because my hands were already moving. It was a payment receipt. Harmon and Associates, family law, consultation fee, $350, dated 2 weeks prior. I stood there with the receipt in my hand. Coffee mug forgotten the other, and something fundamental shifted in my chest. Not anger yet, just clarity, cold and absolute. She was preparing, not for a conversation, for a separation, and she'd hired a lawyer before even talking to me. I took a photo of the receipt with my phone. Then I folded it carefully and put it back in her purse, exactly where it had fallen. That afternoon, while Vanessa was at her late meeting, I went through our shared documents folder on the cloud drive, the one we'd set up years ago for tax returns and mortgage papers, things we'd both forgotten existed. I backed up everything to an external drive, bank statements, email archives, text message exports from our phone plan. I did it methodically, the way I organize lesson plans, creating folders and subfolders, dating everything. I wasn't angry. That's what surprised me most. I felt like an archaeologist documenting ruins. Careful, precise, sorrowful but steady. Every receipt she'd filed for client dinners that happened on nights she said she was working late. Every text thread where her tone shifted from exhausted to animated between 7 and 9 p.m. Patterns emerging like sediment layers. One file, buried in a subfolder labeled Miscellaneous 2019, contained old chat logs she apparently never deleted. Messages from 6 months ago. A name, Troy Ellison. Talks about meeting at the Riverside Inn. Plans to figure out the next steps. References to when this is over. I closed the laptop and sat in my small apartment. I'd moved into it just days after our kitchen confrontation, and stared at the wall. The marriage was gone. I'd known at the moment I found that receipt, but now I understood something worse. She hadn't just left. She'd been building a case. And I'd been cast as the villain in a story I didn't know I was in. Trust doesn't collapse in a moment. It erodes. And I just found the empty riverbed where it used to run. I waited 3 days after finding the messages. Not because I was planning some dramatic confrontation, but because I needed to understand the scope of what I was dealing with. Each evening after school, I sat in my classroom with the door locked, going to the files I'd backed up, cross-referencing dates and locations. April 12th, she said she was at a property inspection in Beaverton. Bank statement showed dinner for two at a steakhouse downtown. Charged to her personal card. May 3rd. Claim exhaustion from inventory audits. Phone records showed a 47-minute call to Troy Ellison at 10:23 p.m. The pattern was meticulous. She'd been careful, but not careful enough. Or maybe she just never expected me to look. On Friday evening, I came home to our house. Still technically our house, though it hadn't felt like ours in months. Vanessa was in the kitchen making salmon, something she did when she wanted the evening to feel normal, civilized. The smell of lemon and dill filled the air. She'd opened a bottle of Pinot Grigio, poured 2 glasses. "Hey," she said, smiling in that careful way. "Thought we could have a nice dinner. It's been a while." I set my bag down by the door, hung my jacket on the hook I'd installed when we first moved in 6 years ago. "We need to talk." Her smile held, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Okay, after dinner? Now." I pulled out my phone, opened the Photos app, and placed it on the kitchen island between us. The receipt from Harmon and Associates filled the screen. She looked at it for a long moment. The salmon hissed in the pan behind her. "You went through my purse." It fell. "But that's not really the point, is it?" She turned off the burner, moved the pan to a cold element, then picked up her wine glass and took a slow sip. When she set it down, her expression had changed. Not guilty, not apologetic, but guarded, strategic. "I was going to tell you." "When? After you'd built your case? After you'd positioned everything the way you wanted it?" "You're making this sound calculated." "Troy Ellison," I said quietly. "The Riverside Inn. 6 months of planning how to end this without me knowing it was ending." Her face went pale, then flushed. "You're tracking me now?" "Monitor my phone. We have a shared cloud account, the one you set up for our tax returns. You forgot to disconnect it." I kept my voice level, factual. "I'm not tracking you. I'm just reading what you documented yourself." She set the wine glass down harder than necessary. "This is exactly why I need space. This controlling behavior. This obsession with knowing where I am every second." The words sounded rehearsed, like dialogue from a script she'd been practicing. I recognized the terminology: controlling, obsession. The language of abuse allegations. The language that works in courtrooms. "You're having an affair," I said, "and you've hired a divorce attorney. Those are facts, not accusations." "I'm not having an affair." Her voice rose slightly, the first crack in her composure. "Troy is a colleague. We've been working on a property development deal together. That's all." "You told him." "Soon at 2 a.m. You had dinner at a steakhouse when you said you were in Beaverton. You've been building a narrative where I'm the problem, so you can leave with custody in the house and whatever else your attorney told you to secure first." "You're twisting everything." She stepped back from the island, creating distance. "I can't do this right now. You're being aggressive." I'm standing still and speaking quietly. "Your energy is aggressive. This whole interrogation is making me feel unsafe." And there it was, the pivot I've been expecting ever since I saw that attorney's name. Unsafe. The magic word that opens doors in family court, that shifts sympathy, that transforms a cheating spouse into a victim. I picked up my phone, put it back in my pocket, and looked at her across the kitchen island where we used to plan weekend trips and argue about whether to adopt a dog. "Then we'll let the court decide." Something flickered across her face. Surprise! Maybe. That I wasn't fighting, wasn't yelling, wasn't giving her the scene she needed to justify her story. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not playing this game. You want a divorce, we'll get a divorce. You want to paint me as dangerous or controlling or whatever version you've workshopped with Harmon and Associates. Go ahead, but I'm not giving you ammunition by losing my temper." I walked past her to the stairs, took them 2 at a time to our bedroom, my former bedroom, and pulled out the duffel bag from the closet. She followed, standing in the doorway, watching as I packed clothes, toiletries, my laptop charger. "Where are you going?" "I found an apartment downtown." Month-to-month lease. I'll send you the address for the custody paperwork I assume is coming. You already rented an apartment? When? 3 days ago. After I found the messages you thought you deleted. I zipped the bag closed, pulled the handle up. From now on, everything goes through attorneys. You want to talk about Lily's schedule, you email Jennifer Coe. You want to discuss property division, you file a motion. We're done with the performance of civility. I walked past her again, down the stairs, past the kitchen where the salmon was growing cold, past the living room where we watched 1,000 movies, past the life I thought we were building together. At the door, I turned back. She was standing at the top of the stairs, backlit by the bedroom light, looking smaller somehow. I loved you, I said. That was real. Whatever you tell yourself about who I was or what I did wrong, remember that part was real. I closed the door behind me, loaded the duffel into my car, and drove to the apartment above the Vietnamese restaurant where the walls were thin and the neighbors were loud, and none of it reminded me of anything we'd built together. That was the night the marriage ended, not with screaming or broken dishes or dramatic ultimatums, just with a duffel bag and a long drive through streets that felt unfamiliar even though I'd lived in this city for 10 years. The war hadn't started yet, but the pretense of peace was finally over. The first motion arrived 6 days later. I was in the middle of teaching the Spanish-American War to my third period juniors when the office aide knocked and handed me a manila envelope marked Urgent Legal Documents. I signed for it, slipped it into my desk drawer, and finished a lesson on yellow journalism and manufactured consent. The irony wasn't lost on me. I opened it during lunch in my empty classroom. Temporary restraining order. Emergency custody modification. Vanessa's attorney, Leonard Frost, had filed a motion claiming I'd exhibited escalating aggressive behavior, that I'd broken into the marital residence and removed property without consent, and that my sudden departure and refusal to communicate directly posed an emotional risk to our daughter Lily. He was asking for immediate supervised visitation only, pending a full hearing. I read it twice, my sandwich untouched on the desk. Every fact was technically true and completely distorted. Yes, I'd taken my clothes from the house, our house, where I still paid half the mortgage. Yes, I'd insisted on attorney-mediated communication after discovering her months-long deception. Yes, I left suddenly, on the same night I confronted her affair. But the way Frost presented it, I sounded unhinged, dangerous, a man spiraling out of control. The hearing was scheduled for 9 days later. I called Jennifer immediately. "They're trying to exhaust you," she said when we met that evening in her small office overlooking a parking garage. She was drinking green tea from a ceramic mug that said, "Nevertheless." Frost does this. Files aggressive motions early, floods you with paperwork, makes you spend money and energy responding to emergencies that aren't emergencies. He wants you angry and broke before we even get to discovery. So what do? We don't react. We respond. Calmly, precisely, with documentation. She opened a legal pad, clicked her pen. "You said you backed up the cloud drive. What exactly do you have?" I spent the next hour walking her through it. The bank statement showing Vanessa's unexplained charges. The phone record with Troy Ellison's number appearing 237 times over 6 months. The text messages where she told her friend Keisha she was laying groundwork for custody. The consultation receipt that predated any conversation about divorce. Jennifer took notes in shorthand I couldn't read, occasionally stopped me to ask for dates or clarification. When I finished, she sat back and studied her notes. "This is good. This is very good. But we need more." She looked up at me. "Do you still have access to the cloud account?" She hasn't changed the password. I don't think she remembers it exists. Don't touch it. Don't access it again. If we're going to use it as evidence, we need to do this correctly through legal channels. I'll file a discovery motion for all shared digital assets. It's above board, it's admissible, and protects you from any accusation of improper access. The restraining order hearing happened on a Wednesday morning. I sat in a different courtroom with a different judge while Frost painted me as a man who'd abandoned his family in a fit of rage and whose pattern of surveillance and control made Vanessa fear for her safety. He brought Keisha to testify, the same friend who'd appeared in Vanessa's text discussing strategy. Keisha described me as always watching where Vanessa went, as someone who seemed jealous and possessive. Jennifer cross-examined her calmly. When did you last see Mr. Caldwell and Mrs. Caldwell together socially? Keisha hesitated. Maybe 8 months ago, at a barbecue. 8 months. And in that single interaction, you assessed him as possessive and controlling. Vanessa told me things. What things specifically? That he always needed to know where she was. That he checked her phone. Jennifer didn't raise her voice. Did you ever personally witness Mr. Caldwell checking his wife's phone? No, but did you ever personally witness Mr. Caldwell displaying aggressive or controlling behavior toward his wife? Not in front of me, but abuse doesn't always... Thank you. No further questions. The judge denied the restraining order, but granted temporary modified custody. I could see Lily 3 evenings a week and alternating weekends, supervised by a neutral third party until the final hearing. It wasn't what Frost wanted, but it wasn't what I wanted either. My daughter, who I'd tucked into bed every night for 7 years, now became a scheduled event monitored by a stranger. The first supervised visit happened at a community center that smelled like basketball sweat and industrial cleaner. Lily was 8, dark-haired like her mother, with my habit of asking questions about everything. She ran to me, hugged me hard, then pulled back and looked at the supervisor, a tired woman named Angela, who sat 15 feet away with a clipboard. Why is that lady watching us? Lily whispered, just new rules for a little while. Sweetheart, it's okay. Mom said you were really angry and needed space. Are you still angry? I knelt down so we were eye level. I'm not angry at you. Not even a little bit. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, okay? She nodded, but her eyes had that uncertain look kids get when the adult world stops making sense. We played Uno. I helped her with a math worksheet she brought. We talked about her upcoming field trip to the Science Museum. Normal things that felt surreal under observation. Every word and gesture potentially documented. Potentially used against me later. Back at my apartment that night, I opened my laptop and continued the project Jennifer had assigned me. A detailed timeline of the last year of my marriage cross-referenced with evidence. Every late night Vanessa claimed was work. Every unexplained charge. Every conversation that now revealed itself as misdirection. It was meticulous work, the kind of analysis I used to do with historical documents for my students. Except this time, I was both the researcher and the subject, documenting my own life's collapse in spreadsheet form. Jennifer called that Friday. The discovery motion was granted. We'll have access to the full cloud archive by next week. Frost filed an objection, but the judge wasn't sympathetic. He wants to see what's there. And if it's what I think it is, then we stop playing defense, she said, and we let the truth do the work. I hung up and looked around my small apartment. Secondhand furniture, boxes still unpacked, the distant smell of pho from the restaurant below. This wasn't where I'd imagined my life going. But somewhere in the last month, between the motions and the supervised visits and the spreadsheets of evidence, the pain had started converting into something else. Not anger. Purpose. They were counting on my emotion, on me breaking down, or lashing out, or giving the narrative they'd scripted. Instead, I gave them silence, documentation, and patience. The war wasn't over, but I'd stopped fighting on their terms. The final hearing began on a gray November morning, exactly 7 months after I'd found that receipt in Vanessa's purse. Judge Matsuda's courtroom felt colder than I remembered, or maybe I'd just gotten used to the November chill that had settled into everything. Jennifer sat beside me in a navy suit, her leather folder precisely aligned with the edge of the table. Inside was the USB drive that had taken us 3 weeks to compile properly, legally, irrefutably. Across the aisle, Vanessa wore a cream-colored blouse and looked composed in the way people do when they practice their expressions in mirrors. Frost sat beside her with his expensive suit and that same leaning-back confidence, the posture of someone who'd already won this argument a dozen times before in a dozen other courtrooms. The gallery was more crowded this time. Vanessa's mother, my brother Tim, who'd driven down from Seattle, a handful of people I didn't recognize, witnesses maybe or law students observing. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keys. Judge Matsuda reviewed her notes, then looked up. We're here for final arguments in the matter of Caldwell versus Caldwell, dissolution of marriage, custody determination, and asset division. Mr. Frost, you may proceed. Frost stood, buttoned his jacket, and addressed the court with the kind of smooth authority that comes from years of winning. Your Honor, this case is straightforward. Mrs. Caldwell entered this marriage in good faith, contributed equally to the household, and has been a primary emotional caregiver to the couple's daughter throughout her life. What we've documented over the past 7 months is a pattern of controlling behavior by Mr. Caldwell that escalated when Mrs. Caldwell began establishing appropriate boundaries. He walked to his table, picked up a folder, and approached the bench. We've submitted evidence of obsessive monitoring. Text messages asking repeatedly about Mrs. Caldwell's whereabouts, unexpected appearances at her workplace, questions about her colleagues that crossed the line from concern into surveillance. I watched him hand the folder to the judge. These were the same text messages I'd sent asking where she was when she missed dinner, when she said she'd be home by 8 and arrived at midnight, when our daughter asked why Mommy wasn't at her school play. Context stripped away, intimacy weaponized. We've also documented Mr. Caldwell's sudden departure from the marital home, his refusal to communicate directly with Mrs. Caldwell, forcing all interaction through attorneys, even regarding their daughter's basic needs. This abandonment, this emotional withdrawal, has been profoundly damaging to both Mrs. Caldwell and their child. Frost returned to his table, picked up another exhibit. Most concerning is evidence that Mr. Caldwell accessed private communications, invaded Mrs. Caldwell's digital privacy, and used information obtained through these violations to construct a false narrative about infidelity, a narrative we've thoroughly discredited through testimony from Troy Ellison himself, who confirmed that his relationship with Mrs. Caldwell was purely professional, related to a commercial property development project. He paused, letting that sink in. Troy had testified 2 weeks ago via video deposition, wearing a button-down and glasses, explaining calmly that he and Vanessa had been collaborating on a mixed-use development proposal, that late-night calls were common in real estate, that the dinner at the steakhouse had been a celebration of closing a deal. He'd been credible, rehearsed, convincing. Your Honor, we're asking for primary custody with supervised visitation for Mr. Caldwell until he completes a domestic violence intervention program, along with 60-40 assets split reflecting Mrs. Caldwell's greater contribution to the household and compensating for the emotional harm caused by Mr. Caldwell's conduct. Frost sat down. Vanessa's hand rested on the table, still and pale. She still hadn't looked at me. Judge Matsuda made a note, then turned to our side. Ms. Coe. Jennifer stood, and something in her stillness made the room feel different. She didn't button her jacket or approach the bench with folders. She simply stood at our table, composed and quiet. Your Honor, Mr. Frost has presented a compelling narrative. It's well constructed, carefully supported, and designed to appeal to our natural sympathies. But it has one fatal flaw. She paused. It isn't true. She picked up the USB drive. The defense would like to submit Exhibit E for the court's consideration. This contains communications recovered through proper legal discovery from a shared cloud storage account that both parties established in 2019 for household financial documents. Mrs. Caldwell was notified of our discovery motion and raised no objection to the account's relevance. The contents were accessed legally, preserved properly, and have been available to opposing counsel for examination for the past 3 weeks. Frost's confident posture shifted slightly. He glanced at Vanessa, who'd gone very still. Jennifer walked the USB drive to the clerk, who took it to the judge's bench and then, at Judge Matsuda's instruction, plugged it into the courtroom's display system. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life. "What the court will see," Jennifer said, returning to our table, "is a 6-month timeline of communications between Mrs. Caldwell and Troy Ellison that go well beyond professional collaboration. Text messages discussing, when this is over, email exchanges about meeting at the Riverside Inn, a hotel, Your Honor, not a property development site. Calendar entries that directly contradict Mrs. Caldwell's testimony about her whereabouts on multiple occasions." The first image appeared on screen. A text message thread, timestamped, with Vanessa's name at the top. The messages were intimate, familiar, nothing like professional correspondence. I didn't read them. I'd read them all weeks ago, each one a small confirmation of what I'd already known. But seeing them projected 10 feet high in a courtroom made them different. Public, undeniable. Frost stood. "Your Honor, I object to this." "On what grounds?" Judge Matsuda didn't look up from the screen. These communications were obtained through legal discovery of a shared account, as Ms. Coe stated. "Your objection is noted and overruled. Continue, Ms. Coe." Jennifer advanced to the next exhibit, a bank statement showing a hotel charge on a night Vanessa had testified she'd been at a property inspection in Salem. Then another message thread, this one between Vanessa and her friend Keisha, the same Keisha who testified about my controlling behavior. The message read, "Frost says we need to establish pattern control before I file. Go to document everything, his texts, his questions, anything that can look possessive. Troy agrees it's the best strategy for custody." The courtroom went silent, except for the heating system's low hum. Jennifer let it sit there for a moment, then advance again. More messages, more timeline contradictions. A voice memo Vanessa had sent to Troy, dated 2 weeks before our kitchen confrontation, saying she'd talked to the lawyer today and that they just need to be patient for a few more weeks. I kept my eyes on the table then. The ruling came 4 days later in a standard legal envelope. I opened it standing in my kitchen with morning light, slanting through the window. The language was formal and dense, but the conclusion was clear. Dismissal of all claims regarding control and behavior, full restoration of joint custody, equal asset division, and a formal retraction to be filed within 30 days. There was also a note that Judge Matsuda was referring certain aspects of Mr. Frost's conduct to the State Bar for review. I set the papers on the counter next to my coffee and stood there for a while, looking out at the alley where someone had painted a blue heron on the brick wall. Not triumph, just lightness, like surfacing after holding my breath underwater for 7 months. The first unsupervised visit with Lily happened that Saturday. Vanessa handed me her backpack at the door without meeting my eyes. Lily came running down the stairs talking about bookstores and pizza, her voice bright and uncomplicated. We spent the afternoon at Powell's, had lunch at the place on Burnside where they make the crust thin and charred the way she likes. Over pizza, she asked, "Are you and Mom ever going to be friends again?" "Probably not the way we used to be," I said, "but we both love you and that doesn't change." She seemed satisfied with that. Kids are resilient in ways adults forget how to be. That night, I pulled out a small cardboard box from my closet. Wedding photos, court documents, the flash drive labeled Truth. I looked through it once, then pushed it to the back of the shelf. I didn't need to keep proving what had happened. The truth had done its work. The next morning I woke early, made coffee, and stood at the window watching the city wake up. Delivery trucks, joggers, someone walking a dog. The apartment was small and the furniture mismatched, but it was mine, a place I'd chosen, not fled to. I had lesson plans to finish, groceries to buy, a soccer game to attend Wednesday. Normal things. The architecture of a life that was smaller than I'd planned, but more honest than I'd been living. They'd try to bury me in lies and carefully constructed narratives. But I'd learned something in those 7 months. The truth doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need dramatics or revenge or public vindication. It just needs to be documented, presented clearly, and given time to speak for itself.